3, and you're listening to the 123 show with me, Noreen Mir, on this Thursday afternoon. So let's turn to our very first topic and guest of today. In the next 15 minutes or so, we'll be talking about our mental health, because as we hear always on the 123 show, that health is wealth, and the mental side of things are just as important as our physical health. And in particular this afternoon, we're focusing on the effects of the new wave of the pandemic with Dr. Eslyn Terragina, a chartered psychologist and also a psychotherapist with Mind Balance. Welcome back on the program, Eslyn. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Noreen. It's great to be back. I guess a little corona fatigue, like everyone else is with this third wave. But yeah, otherwise working from home and resettling into that routine.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's exactly that. People are probably quite tired in general, and also quite tired of the coronavirus. I mean, how are some of your clients feeling, or what sorts of reports have you been hearing?
Well, I think in general, everybody can relate to just being exhausted. The new regulations, they of course, are stricter than they were before, and things like that. So this comes after a period where we were actually starting to lift some of the restrictions, right? So there was a bit of a relief and the hope that, this would all soon be over. And now we've gone backwards, of course. So yeah, that puts a big strain on anyone's mental health, and a sense of anxiety, confusion, not knowing what the future will bring, and just very, very low mood for a lot of people in general. Sort of a loss of motivation, and then a lack of pleasure in doing things that they used to enjoy, and also, of course, not being able to do a lot of things that we used to enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, and also I remember a month ago we talked a little bit more about readjusting back to working in the office, because with the coronavirus, many of us had to work from home. But then with things looking a bit brighter in Hong Kong, well, a few weeks ago, we're looking a bit better, and people were starting to resume going back to the office. But now with this new wave, people are having to readjust to readjust back to working back in at home. How might that also play on our mental health?
Well, it's the constant change that's an issue, right? So not only are things constantly moving, constantly changing, we keep having to adapt to new regulations and new ways of working, but then, of course, also we don't know how long this is going to go on for. And I guess we kind of feel a sense of loss of control is quite typical at the moment, because we don't really have any control over what COVID's going to be doing. We have little control over what restrictions are going to be put in place. And so, a lot of the time we feel, to an unusual extent, we feel like we are every at the mercy of other bigger decisions, right? Mm. And that loss of a sense of control can really cause a lot of anxiety and also depression, and just general feeling of feeling low.
I've also read that for some, it can also make people less anxious because of this fatigue. People feel like, well, this is just going to be the norm, and this is just the way it is. So they've actually let their guard down a little bit, and they're less anxious about the coronavirus. Does that also make sense in a way?
I think that people numb out after a while. It's a little bit like, it's a little bit like seeing a lot of the, if you see a lot of murders on TV or a lot of brutality, that eventually we sort of numb out to it. And I guess in a way, even with coronavirus, it works that way, right? We're saying, okay, well, we're washing our hands, we're wearing our masks, and yet the cases are still going up. So there's almost a defeatist sense of, well, what does it really matter? And is this just going to be our new reality? And almost a surrender to that. Yeah. Which, of course, isn't a sign of fantastic optimum mental health at all. It's more really, it's almost like a sign of a sort of a giving up. Right.
Exactly. And because of this sort of new wave of restrictions, more people, I mean, we can't even eat outside anymore. So a lot of people are just sort of staying indoors a lot of the times, which is good. We're supposed to be staying indoors. But also for people who have pre-existing mental health conditions, or even for regular folks, what are the effects of staying indoors for a prolonged period of time? How will it worsen our anxieties or mental health conditions?
I think a big part of it is isolation, right? If we're feeling socially disconnected, and social interactions for humans are a really big part of mental health and a big part of balanced mental health. So having a strong social network, a strong family network that we can rely on and connect with is important for us to make sure we're anchored in something and anchored in our social environment. So I think that's going to be a big part. But I also see that a lot of people just have hopelessness because we don't know how this is going to affect our economy, or, well, we know it's not going to be a positive effect for the most part. And so also worry about the future and what the world's going to look like even in 3 to 6 months' time, because a lot of people, and myself included, when this all started out in January, were quite hopeful that it would be quickly contained, which, of course, doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah. What about this point that, people have to have a new routine, basically? This is the new normal, if you like. How should we go about establishing a new routine to gain that sense of control back?
Yeah, that's actually the key thing that you're bringing up there, is really regaining a sense of control in the little things. So what can we make decisions over within the parameters of the restrictions at the moment? What can we decide to do? What actions can we take? And it can be very small ones. It could be something about how are we going to spend our time, or how are we going to set a boundary between our work time and our so-called home office, and our family time and our leisure part of the house. And things like that. So really, rather than trying to control the big things, looking at controlling little steps and building in activities that make us feel intrinsically happy and joyful. And that can be things like spending time with our family, with our kids, with our animals. It can also be spending time on ourselves, doing something creative, or really getting around to reading that book that we've been meaning to read, things like that. A lot of people have turned to puzzles, I've seen on Facebook, and those kind of things, just to really, because at the moment we're kind of forced into being at home, we're forced into maybe taking a little bit of a step back from work, and that can trigger quite a knee-jerk reaction in many of us, and certainly a lot of anxiety. And so trying to regain some of that control in the little things while giving ourselves a sense of pleasure and small achievements as well is really important at the moment.
Yeah. With people sort of living with each other, whether it's couples or housemates, sometimes, you crave that connection and you want to sort of talk to others, but, sometimes it can also be quite overwhelming because you're stuck in the same roof the whole time. So how do you go about navigating that really fine line where, like for example, I missed having guests in the studio. I miss talking to people face to face. And it's exactly what you said. We need to feel that connection with people. But how do you sort of balance that with someone who sort of needs their own space, or if you've got a housemate who doesn't really want to interact very much? How should you navigate that?
When the other family members are blinking too loud, yeah. No, I guess, importantly there is a mix of boundary settings and a bit of shared vulnerability, and just saying, we're all different in our coping strategies. Some people prefer to withdraw, some people prefer to connect. Of course, if you've got one person wanting to connect and the other person wanting to withdraw, that can lead to some tension. But it's something that's manageable through a bit of conversation and also a little bit of vulnerability, where we can say, look, I really am stressed and I need to withdraw, and maybe we can set time aside later this evening or tomorrow or whenever suits, where we can connect, because, I understand you're also stressed, right? So kind of setting a boundary around how we manage our time, how we manage our interactions, but also being aware that we're not just the only ones who are stressed, but also, of course, the people we're living with will also be experiencing stress and anxiety. And just trying to balance out how we manage our own time, our own feelings, but also how we manage the feelings and time of the people who live with us.
Yeah, Eslyn, you touched on a really good point just now. Is that feeling of sort of hopelessness? For some people, the anxiety also comes from the unknown. We don't know what the long-term effects are from the coronavirus, maybe be it economically or physically. So it's kind of bleak in a way, you just don't know what's going to happen. How do you sort of rein in those feelings and not let yourself get drowned by the unknown. You refuse to let the unknown sort of make you scared. How do you sort of tell our listeners to do that when you are worried about the future?
Well, I mean, frankly, the unknown is scary. Our brains prefer predictability and security. So it's probably a combination of allowing some space for those feelings, right? And actually sitting down and sitting with those feelings a little bit, exploring them, exploring what we're really scared of at the core and things like that. Because those feelings have the right to be there. In fact, they probably should be there because we're all going through a period of uncertainty. And also a period of grief. I mean, the knee-jerk reaction we see in other countries, say, for example, the US, where people are really against wearing masks and saying, it infringes on their freedoms. In a way, we are experiencing a loss of the freedom that we've known, right? And I'm not saying someone's infringing on our rights to freedom, but because of the fact that we can't just casually go out for a coffee and sit in a coffee shop with friends, that's a freedom we've always known, and suddenly that's not available to us. So we'll be experiencing a sort of a loss, a sort of a grieving process. So there's a lot of feelings that are allowed to come up in that time, and be it frustration, be it depression, be it anxiety, and just grief of, now I can't do these things that I used to love doing. So sitting with those feelings, and then at the same time, once we've given the feelings a bit of space and a bit of attention, to then, like I said previously, move towards the little things that we can control, the little choices we can make on a day-to-day basis, rather than trying to plan ahead for the next couple of years.
Yeah. One feeling that we didn't touch on, I'd like to also mention, is anger. I've noticed people are quite angry, especially when you go down the street and you see people, well, now not so much, but some people don't really wear a mask and they're still sort of going about their regular routine, maybe having a drink. I live in Kennedy Town, for example, and there are some bars there, and people are still sort of standing around, hanging out outside, having a drink, and I just stare daggers at them. I feel quite angry. I'm thinking, here we are trying to, mask up and keep our social distancing. There are others sort of breaking the rules. And I can't help but feel a little bit angry. And I've seen people take to social media with a bit of a rant. Oh, why aren't people? So how do you manage this feeling of anger and be at ease that, we can't control other people? So how do we control our own feelings?
Well, I mean, let's look at the anger and where it comes from, right? It's also part of the grieving process. Anger is a stage of grief when you lose something.
Yeah,
and that's
true.
And it's going to be enhanced because not only are we maybe losing something, but we're also sacrificing something, right? By not meeting our friends, by sticking to the regulations. So if we're seeing other people who are not making that sacrifice for the greater good, that's going to bring about anger. And then, of course, also the anger of, seeing people do that, gathering groups that might actually prolong the sacrifice and the loss that we're experiencing, right? So the anger is absolutely valid to be there. And I think you said something important there, which is you can't control what other people are doing. And unfortunately, that's pretty much at the essence of how we do manage our anger. Acknowledging it and understanding where it comes from, but also ultimately looking at, what can we change? What can we actually do? And it's not going to be controlling other people's behavior. Typically, a Facebook rant has rarely changed anyone's strong opinion on anything. Sometimes it's important to vent. It can be very, very cathartic, actually, if we're meeting with people who are like-minded, who also share in our rant and let us experiencing some of that emotion. Anger is usually secondary emotion for something more vulnerable. Typically, even in this case, it will probably more likely be anxiety and fear. If they're drinking out with their masks off and the cases keep rising, then there's a fear of how long are we going to be stuck in this sort of limbo zone or grey zone. And then also maybe a little bit of sadness and a little bit of grief. So I consider anger typically a secondary emotion to some underlying vulnerability that we're trying to protect.
Yeah. Well, I like the point that you also mentioned that we need to gain a sense of control, be it, finding time to exercise and just the little things in life and gratitude also. I know oftentimes we complain about technology, but it really is times like these where we use technology to connect with other people. I mean, thank goodness for technology that I'm able to get you to share your wisdom with our listeners, and also technology just to stay connected with friends and family we have around the world. Even if we have family living in Hong Kong, the chances are many of us aren't able to see these family members because of restrictions. So
That's right.
technology has really prevailed this time, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, with the gratitude also comes a sense of empathy, right? So, I'm very fortunate. I live out on Lantau Island, so we have a lot of space out here. We have a lot of nature, and working from home here is really not a chore. But other people will be stuck in very, very small places, and they might be struggling. They might have family overseas that is sick, or they might be worried about elderly parents, things like that. So, really also making the effort, despite our own confusing and stressed feelings, to maybe step outside of that and just try and experience some empathy and compassion for some of the other people out there, including people that might be violating some of the regulations, and really trying to humanize, because I feel like that's what we do a lot on Facebook, is we demonize people and we say, oh, they're all evil, etc. And honestly, even just for our own mental health and our own emotion management, it's helpful to see the human in that person that has frustrated us, and really experience some compassion there, and try and make a connection rather than just, for lack of a better word, hating on someone.
Exactly. I was speaking to some of my colleagues in the newsroom, and they spoke to a man in his 20s, and he lives with his sister, his parents, and his grandparents. And because his grandparents are sort of in the high risk group, him and his sister in their 20s are working from home, and they're not allowed to leave their house, literally on a lockdown in a small sort of 500 square feet apartment, and they can't leave their house because their parents are worried about them going out and infecting the grandparents. So, and they feel lonely and they feel bored and trapped, I think is the word also. So that's become a reality for many people, unfortunately.
Yeah. And everyone has a different trigger. Some people can handle the feeling of being trapped better. For other people, that's a really, really big deal. A lot of the triggers are based on our past experiences. So if we've experienced feeling trapped in the past, then we might be particularly triggered right now. Or if we've experienced health issues in the past, we might be particularly anxious right now. So really considering that everyone comes from a unique combination of experiences that might lead them to feel differently, or feel differently triggered by different things that are happening at the moment.
Yeah, well said. Eslyn, remind our listeners once again how we can find out more about you and your work. Have you got a website and a Facebook page?
Yep, sure. So my website is mind-balance.org, and that's also my Facebook page, Mind Balance HK. There's also, I've got a few COVID-19 related resources, but also just some other free mental health resources, both on my website and also on my Facebook page. So if anyone wants to check that out, they're very welcome to do so.
Excellent. Well, Eslyn, it's such a pleasure to speak to you again, and I look forward to chatting with you very soon. And we've been talking to Dr. Eslyn Terragina, a chartered psychologist and psychotherapist with Mind Balance. Go to her website and Facebook page for more. Thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thanks.